the anniversary, 3,338 years ago, and God gives us the Torah anew each year, and the day we became a nation at Mount Sinai. Well, we discussed some ways of preparing for Shavuos, whether it is your shopping and your cooking and everything you need to get ready for the holiday. What else did we talk about? I think we left off yesterday after candle lighting. So let's go on from here. After you light your candles, you're getting ready for Yom Tov. So hopefully you'll be at Shul. At Shul, you are going to pray. Now, the evening prayer is actually a very short prayer tomorrow night. The only thing I want to say about tomorrow evening's prayers is that it has to be done after it is dark outside. Why after it's dark? Because the counting of the Omer, we are told, has to be Sheva Shabbosais Tamimais, 7 complete weeks. So therefore, while you can daven Ma'ariv early on ordinary evening if you need to, although I don't see the reason to daven earlier than the current Zman, because it's as it is early. I understand summertime where people want to be home earlier, so you daven earlier, but these days it's not really necessary. It is winter here, and its sunset is around 5:30 or even earlier. So you really have no reason not to want to, not to pray, pray on time. I imagine I have to check what time Tzeis is, but it's about 6 p.m. So tomorrow evening you will daven Ma'ariv around 6 p.m. Let's talk about the prayers. I don't think you need me to take you through the full prayers. It's very short, but the central theme of the prayer where we transition from a weekday service to a Yom Tov service is really going to be, actually, it's from the beginning because we're using the same service as a Shabbos, but it's at the Amidah where our prayer focuses on gratitude to God for choosing us to give us the Torah, and we are grateful for this blessing that we are chosen amongst the nations to celebrate the holidays, that God gives us the Torah, and we ask God to grant us the blessing of life, of joy, of merriment on this holy day of Shavuos. Think about some of the prayers that we say. A lot of the anti-Semites out there look at this prayer, which talks about being the chosen nation. But what they don't realize is, what does chosen mean? We are selected from the nations to practice the Torah, to study the Torah, to observe its commandments. And that's what we're celebrating on this holiday, the time that God gave us the Torah at Mount Sinai. So I think this prayer resonates with all the Jewish holidays, but especially with the festival of Shavuos that we're celebrating tomorrow, because after all, this is the time that we celebrate God giving us the Torah. The central blessing of the prayer service is the words Mekadesh Yisrael v'Hazmanim. Although there's no repetition in the evenings during the day, the Chazan will conclude with the tune Mekadesh Yisrael v'Hazmanim, which means that God sanctifies Israel and designates special times. Of course, the second day of Yom Tov is going to be Shabbos. And while every Shabbos we say Mekadesh HaShabbos, that God sanctifies Shabbos, on Yom Tov, first night you're just going to say Mekadesh Yisrael V'Hazmanim, that God sanctifies the Israel and our designated times, whereas you're going to add the word Shabbos when it comes to Friday night. Now, there's a big difference though between Shabbos and Yom Tov, because God alone is the one who sanctifies Shabbos. If you think about Shabbos, Shabbos happens every single week without any human contribution. When the sun sets on Friday every single week, the holiness of Shabbos spontaneously descends into the world. Remember the story of the Ruzhiner, Rabbi Yisrael of Ruzhin, how he had to he saw outside, he experienced, he scented, the Shabbos is descending into the world. I'm reminded of a story they say of Rabbi Mendel Haraducker, who was a chassid of the Alter Rebbe and moved to the Holy Land, lived in Tzfat. And there was some guy outside hanging around and blowing a shofar and claiming he was Mashiach. Reminds me of another old story. There was a guy who came to the mikveh. In the mikveh, you could pick up all the rumors. Yeah, you heard that President Clinton once came, the old joke they used to say was when I was a kid, it was President Clinton in the 90s. So I repeat it as such, because that's when, and I'm a teen of the 90s. And the story goes that President Clinton he heard that in the mikveh, the Jews talk all the news. So he decides to go to the mikveh. He dresses up, puts on a fake beard. He's there in the mikveh. He hears them talking. Did you hear President Clinton is in town? Anyways, there's one guy in the mikveh. He says, "Oh, manshich is nas," which means my shoes are wet. Because after all, a mikveh, there's water. But the other guy misheard him and says, Mashiach Sangas, Mashiach is in the street. So this one Mashiach is in the street, he's claiming to be Mashiach. He's running around, blowing a shofar. So they told Ramendel Haraducker. Ramendel Haraducker opened the window, took a snuff, and says, no, Mashiach is not here yet. So the Hasidim were discussing and explaining this. Why did he have to open the window to know if Mashiach is here or not? They said because for him, he already lived in the Messianic era. Him, where he was, in his environment, in his surround, in his room, you already felt the presence of Mashiach. So he had to smell if Mashiach is outside too. I know these are mystical types of stories. I'm not the kind of person who knows by looking outside if Shabbos is here. But the Heilige Ruzhin, the Holy Rabbi Yisrael of Ruzhin, when the sun would descend and he would know, there's a Shabbos or Yom Tov atmosphere. But there's a big difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov that I wanted to illustrate. Because Shabbos, God created the world in 6 days and rested on Shabbos the 7th. So automatically, every single week, when the sun sets on Friday, Shabbos spontaneously descends into the world. But what happens to Yom Tov? Yom Tov is a regular, mundane weekday. And guess what we have the ability to do? We have the opportunity, when a holiday comes, to elevate a mundane weekday and to bring it to a higher realm, to sanctify Yom Tov, because Yom Tov is determined by the day of the month rather than by the day of the week. Shabbos is the day of the week, right? Every single Friday night, Saturday. Yom Tov can change. And Shavuot is even more so than any other holiday. Whereas the other holidays have a designated date in the calendar. The Torah itself says the 15th of Nisan will be Pesach, right? Every year, the only difference is between diaspora and Israel in the times of the temple was that the sanctification of the new moon. You didn't know if Rosh Chodesh, which basically the lunar cycle, if you listen to Rabbi Jacobson's shir the other night, was really powerful and fascinating. And the difference, the moon cycle is about 29 and a half days. Because there's no such thing really as a half day. So our sages made it that Rosh Chodesh will either be, the previous month will either be 29 or 30 days. Some months 29, some months 30. Basically, it's split about 6 months of each. And that's how you'll get a 29 or 30 day month. But the lunar cycle, pretty much is a 29 and a half day cycle. So if you were outside of Israel, you didn't know if it was on this day or the next day. There's no options. It's 29 or 30 days, the month. So you celebrated 2 days of a holiday. But when it comes to Shavuos, the Torah says, "Usfartem lachem," you should count for yourself 50 days Mimachar Shabbos from Pesach. So Shavuos will be the 50th day. So you just count 50 days, you'll reach Shavuos. But here's a fascinating experience that I had. When I went to Australia for Pesach 2008 with my wife and kid. And so when we left Australia on a Tuesday evening, we arrived in America Tuesday afternoon. Could you believe it? We counted the Omer in Australia Tuesday night. We counted 15 days. So what do I do now when the sun sets again on Tuesday evening in America? I counted 15 already the previous sunset by Ma'ariv. And the law is that every sunset or every night is a new count. So for me, that became count number 16. So I was ahead of everyone else. But luckily, I wasn't the only one. And when I came to New York, there were plenty of other people who had crossed the date line. It's not ideal to cross the international date line during the Omer because it creates a problem that you have to now celebrate Shavuos a day earlier. So that's what we did. I'm telling you this again to illustrate how we are the ones who sanctify Yom Tov because it's determined by the day of the month with an ordinary Yom Tov. And when it comes to Shavuos, it is determined by the counting of days from Pesach. So when the High Court, when the Sanhedrin would declare the opening of a new month on the basis of the testimony of witnesses who had seen the new moon, that's the date of the month. Since the new month depends on the declaration that was made by the witnesses testifying that they saw the new moon, so we are sanctifying the moon, the month, right? And we thank God for sanctifying us, the Jewish people, that we have the ability, that we are empowered to sanctify the days of the month and to determine the date of a holiday. And especially when you're coming to Shavuos, when we are actually counting the days to this holiday. Now, of course, our spiritual level, on a spiritual level, I wanted to say, this means that Shabbos is a gift that we receive from above, but Yom Tov is a gift that we are able to give to God from below. And so it comes from within, and it is extra precious and special in that sense. And therefore, my friends, it is something of an elevated level. And that's why we say this blessing, Mekadesh Yisrael v'hazemanim. All right. It's a very short service tomorrow evening. I encourage everybody to go to shul, to be part of it. Now, whether you go to shul then or not, we'll talk about the next part of the evening, where you either go back to shul or even at home. Regardless where you are, let's talk about the evening, because there's a long evening ahead tomorrow, so I encourage you to get a good night's rest tonight. Let's start first with the evening meal. One of the special Shabbos moments that we enjoy every week is when we sing Shalom Aleichem. We welcome the angels. Eishes Chayil, we get to sing to our women of valor, whether it's to your mothers or to your wives or to your daughters or to any other significant others. But we sing, we welcome the angels, we honor the women of our lives. But these melodies are unique to Shabbos. And because it's Yom Tov, we're not going to sing these melodies. This year, the second night of Shavuos is Friday night. So in order not to overshadow the Yom Tov experience, we are still going to recite them, but quietly in an undertone. The first night, we don't sing it at all. These are melodies that are strictly for Shabbos, not for Yom Tov, okay? Now, unlike Shabbos Kiddush, which is a biblical obligation, actually Yom Tov Kiddush is a rabbinic enactment. But all the laws that pertain to Kiddush and Shabbos pertain to Kiddush and Yom Tov. However, the Kiddush on Yom Tov is different than Shabbos Kiddush. You're not going to say Yom HaShishi tomorrow, because tomorrow is Yom HaChamishi. You know what I'm saying? It's not yet Yom HaShishi. So actually it is Yom HaShishi, but it's not the Shabbos. The core of the Kiddush mandate is our verbal proclamation about the sanctity of the day. Our sages said that it should be recited over a cup of wine because we want to underscore the significance of the holiday, and so we don't drink an ordinary beverage. In many cultures, wine is an important drink. It provides an atmosphere of prominence, right? You say l'chaim, you drink the nicest wine for celebrations, for special occasions. Well, the same thing, Judaism uses wine to mark our numerous momentous occasions in our life, whether it's a bris or a wedding or Shabbos or Yom Tov, any other special occasion, Shabbat Brachos. If you can't drink wine, drink grape juice. Of course, if you can't drink grape juice, you can find another substitute, I guess challah. But the point is that we start every one of our special Shabbos and Yom Tov meals with Kiddush. The Kiddush cup, I'm not going to go through all the details of it as we do for Pesach. It's not as intricate, but as Pesach, same thing. You have to make sure it has at least 86 mil or 3 point something ounces. And the custom is to use a fancy goblet that is designated for this mitzvah. Interesting, AI gave me this one that is a very popular silver becher, but it's not overflowing. The custom is that you want your blessing, your cup to overflow with blessings. So you make your cup overflow with wine. This doesn't mean you have to waste wine, but it should overflow a little bit. The Chabad custom of our silver cups is actually without the stem. Now, what if you don't like the taste of metal, especially the cheap tawdry, those Metal, they're a waste. I don't even know why they make them. Those things look horrible after no time. So don't get those. I know we sell them in our Chabad bookstore, and you can get them for 50 rand, but it's not worth it because those are one-time use, and the wine tastes horrible in those cups. So I'm not encouraging or endorsing anybody buying those cups. Actually, my mother-in-law bought me a beautiful glass wine goblet. I used it for many years till that broke too. But I find that wine tastes better in glass. So you're better off drinking in a wine glass goblet. But if you're using silver, real silver tastes better than these metallic ones that leave a horrible taste and ruin a good wine. Whatever cup you use, ideally use a smaller one for Kiddush. Why? Because you're supposed to drink roiv kais, which means most of the cup. And unless you like to drink down a dry wine, actually, sweet wines are easier to drink in one go. Then halachically, it's better off to probably make the Kiddush then on the sweeter wine. But ideally, you should use your best wine for Kiddush. So if you like a nice dry wine, just use a smaller cup. Now, most people aren't familiar with all these halachas. That's why you come to Chabad. We're learning halacha. We're not just learning halacha. I'm taking you through the customs, traditions, and the laws. The laws are very important. And since the law is that you're supposed to drink most of the cup, that's why I'm telling you to ideally drink from a smaller goblet. Okay. What else do we want to talk about here? From there, you're going to go to the challahs. Why am I even talking about this? You know this. You go through it every week. Because we do this class before each holiday. And you know when it comes to Rosh Hashanah or Pesach, it's a different order. Rosh Hashanah, you're going to have your apples dipped in honey now, right? You're going to eat your special fruit before you wash. On Pesach, you're going to go wash, but you're not going to eat bread. So that's why I feel like it's important to still go through it. So now you're going to wash and have your challahs. Many people actually will have not the challah like you see in this picture, but rather a round challah, as is customary to differentiate, to distinguish from a holiday, from Shabbos to a holiday. So many people will use the round challahs. Okay, but we discussed many times the idea of Lechem Mishnah. If you want, we could talk more about it, about the idea of Lechem Mishnah that you're going to have. One other thing somebody's mentioning to me here, so I will definitely tell you. You see, you always have candles at Yom Tov meal. So there is a custom that we glance at our candles during the Kiddush. Also, I want to say, if you didn't light your candles yet, unlike a regular Shabbos where you cannot light the candles after sunset, you can light in the 18 minutes if you really need to, right? Maybe that's why we get those 18 minutes because, we need what would we do if not for the last minute? And some people only wait till the last minute, myself included. So fine. But we glance at the candles before the bracha of Hagafen. But on Yom Tov, you can light your candles later. And in fact, if you missed it at the meal, you could even light it later at home. We had that discussion yesterday. Where should you light the candles? Whether at home or where you're having your meal. Both are different opinions. I think if you are sleeping in your own home, then you should light it ideally in your own home. And if you didn't light it before you went to shul, you can light it when you come back from shul. But either way, that is, pardon, I hear somebody talking in the background.
You said you have to do something.
It's a script, but I've got one for tomorrow.
Sorry, ladies and gents, I'm going to ask you to please mute yourselves, if you don't mind, unless you have a question or comment for the shir. Okay, so if you don't mind to just keep your gadgets muted. Okay, what about, someone's asking here, what about Kiddush? Does only one person make Kiddush? I grew up with every member of the family and all our guests over Bar Mitzvah. Everyone recited Kiddush. My kids, I don't know, they don't like making Kiddush. So if you're not going to make your own Kiddush, then at least answer Kiddush to someone else who is reciting the Kiddush. In the Kiddush liturgy, we describe Yom Tov as Mikra Kodesh, that it's called a holy. Unlike Shabbos, I would say, because Shabbos is inherently holy, right? Shabbos is transcendent. It can't lower itself into the world. Yom Tov is not as transcendent. It can fall on a weekday, right? So on Yom Tov, we can call or summon the holiness. We're bringing about the holiness into this world. We're turning a regular mundane weekday into a holy day. That's part of the idea. So I hope that answers your question about why we say Mikra Kodesh. In the Kiddush as well, we also say, that's right, the Kiddishanu b'mitzvos, that God sanctified us with his commandments. Okay? What else does Kiddishanu mean? Anyone know? I was just at a wedding yesterday, and what do we call the first part of what do we call the action, the ritual, the ceremony under the chuppah, we call it kiddushin. Kiddushin is betrothal. So actually, especially on Shavuos, I would say that when you are reciting the Kiddush, and you say Asher Kiddishanu, that God sanctified us, also think of the concept of Kiddushin, that reflect on the fact that God betrothed us at Mount Sinai on this day. So it's true we say it on every holiday, but I would say it's particularly relevant to the holiday of Shavuos, that we're saying Asher Kiddishanu, that God betrothed us. Okay, I hope that answers all the questions about Kiddush. Any other questions on Kiddush before I go to the Hamotzi? Okay, so let's go back to Hamotzi now. Hamotzi in Jewish law says that Kiddush is not valid unless it is immediately followed by a meal. And there's an important message here. Kiddush is a spiritual endeavor, but we need to make sure that it influences our regular life, the way we eat, the way we drink, the way we conduct ourselves. So hence we're going to wash our hands. What's the significance of washing our hands? Hands symbolize action, right? We do actions with our hands. So we're going to wash our hands to sanctify them after we make hamotzi, and hopefully symbolizing the idea that the sanctity and transcendence aren't only it's not only for our regular living, but it should permeate our regular life. I'm going to stop the screen for a second. I want to just throw in a text that I had, and let me put it into the slides. Give me a second here. I had another text. I had a few texts. So let me just find where I put them. Let's stick the texts in so you can have them included. Yeah, I asked Canva to fix up my slides because they weren't looking so good. So just give me a second here it didn't put in the Kiddush. Hold on. Let's just stick it in there. Just a second. Is this the one? This is it. So let's stick it in right over here. Okay. There we go. Okay, back to share the slide. See, you even get a tech lesson here in the middle of the shir. So you learn how to also do some technology. Okay, let's continue here. I wanted to share with you a little insight from the Rebbe about this. The Rebbe says as follows: the Torah commands that Shabbos and holidays must be people. Doesn't mean that only the soul should derive spiritual pleasure from Shabbos or the holiday. The body must also derive pleasure from Shabbos and the holiday. Moreover, the primary objective of the mitzvah of pleasure is specifically to refine the body. Because the body naturally derives pleasure from eating and drinking, the Torah says that the obligation to take pleasure on Shabbos is facilitated through eating. It is only in this way that the pleasure of Shabbos can truly permeate and refine the body. Fasting in order to repent and so forth can bring pleasure to the soul, but does not bring pleasure to the body. That's why on Yom Kippur we can fast, right? But on Shabbos and Yom Tov you're not allowed to fast. Even if someone is refined to the point that fasting does not cause bodily suffering, and even provides the body with sanctification of bringing pleasure to the soul, nevertheless, this is not a natural pleasure for the body. Rather, it is a result of the soul forcing the body to deny its basic nature, even if it is a holy and refined body. So I want to talk about this. Why do we eat 2 loaves of bread at our meal? Very important idea that is worthwhile discussing. Because they remind us of the manna from heaven, right? Which we're reading about in the current Torah portion, the journey of our ancestors in the desert, Bamidbar. When the Jewish people were in the desert, that's what sustained them. The manna rained down from heaven every day. But what happened Friday and Yom Tov? They got a double portion on Erev Shabbos and Erev Yom Tov that fell for that day and for the next. So each Shabbos and Yom Tov, we actually commemorate, we remember this miracle of the manna of God providing for us while we were in the desert. And so we do the same by having 2 challahs at the table under the cover. And of course, the double covering by having a covering above and having a challah board beneath. It symbolized the dew that protected the manna that fell from heaven. So this is also one of the reasons why we cover the challah at Kiddush, because the manna would fall between these two layers of dew, right? One above it, one beneath it. That's what kept it fresh and clean. And so the same thing today, when we cover our challah, whatever you use to cover your challah, it should either be properly covered. For this imagery, AI left it uncovered, so you can see this a challah, but you're supposed to actually have it properly covered. Okay, and that's what reminds us of the caring way in which God delivered the manna to us in the desert. And by remembering the manna, it reminds us that just as God provided for our ancestors back then in the wilderness, so does God provide for us now as well. We don't provide for ourselves through our own efforts. Yes, it's true. You go to work, you have to do whatever it takes. God helps those who help themselves, as we say. We have to do our best and God will do the rest. Those are all true. God provides for us through our efforts. So on Shabbos and Yom Tov, when we are abstaining from work, and it's always a challenge. People tell me they have to go to work and they're afraid they're going to lose money. It's important to remember that our income actually, God is the source of our income, that God's the one who provides for us, and therefore we should constantly have that in mind when Shabbos and Yom Tov comes, that even though you're going to take off of work to come to Shul on Yom Tov, to hear the 10 Commandments again, and to tap into that energy again, we have to remember that, yes, taking off work might feel like a sacrifice. And ultimately you want to get to the level that it's not a sacrifice, right? Because Karban, the sacrificial offerings that our ancestors brought in the temple, that was outside of the temple. Outside in the courtyard was the outside altar. That's where you brought karbanas, sacrifices. And karban is the word to come close. When you sacrifice, you can get closer to another person. You can get closer to God. But on the golden altar inside the sanctuary, what was brought there? The ketoras, the incense. And as we discussed before, ketoras is related to the word keter, means a knot, an inextricable bond and connection that's inseparable from God, where you reach that ultimate intimate space, which is what we celebrate on Shavuos, the intimacy that we connect with Hashem like in a marriage, that we accepted the Torah, which is like the marriage contract. And so the ideal level is you don't feel like you're sacrificing for your loved one. You feel intimately connected in an inextricable way. And that's the ideal level we want to get to. There's another reason also for covering the challah before Kiddush, and that we know is a separate discussion, but worthwhile just repeating here, because after all, we're receiving the Torah on Shavuos, and we know that the tablets have two sides. One side, the spiritual, the theological side, and the other side is about the social, interpersonal side, and both are important, meaning God takes offense when we offend somebody else. And the reason we cover the challah on our table, one of the reasons is because in the sequence, the order of foods that the land of Israel is blessed with, it starts off wheat, barley, grape, right? Then goes, what's next after grape? Date, pomegranate, olives and figs, or figs and olives. I'm already forgetting the order. But either way, the point is that the wheat comes first. And so generally speaking, we make sure that we're going to eat bread first. You're going to have lunch today. If there's bread, you'll have the bread before your grapes. Now, I repeat this over and over because it's a reminder to me that if we have to be sensitive to the feelings of the bread, and that's why we cover the challah, because on Shabbos and Yom Tov, the tradition is to recite Kiddush before partaking of the bread. So to be sensitive to the bread, we're covering it, right? To save it from its shame, so to say its demotion and status on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Obviously, challah doesn't have feelings, right? But our sages wanted an important lesson, which is why we repeat this lesson over and over to remind ourselves that if an inanimate piece of bread, challah, must be treated with such sensitivity and consideration, we need to remind ourselves constantly that how much more so we should be on guard not to embarrass or hurt our loved ones and any person. So it's important that you cover the challah to remember this lesson, that the sensitivity we should have to others. Of course, the challah can have beautiful covers, and many people, including my family, we have a Shabbos cover we use during the week. We have a Yom Tov cover. Since my wife and I received many challah covers for our wedding, we couldn't return them or re-gift them because Many of them were inscribed with our name. So we use different ones for different Shabbases and certainly for Yom Tov. And once you made Kiddush and you're ready to unveil the challah, you could uncover it and show that they are special for the Yom Tov presents. And of course, you're going to, after washing your hands, going to make the bracha on the hamotzi. Just a halachic point, we lightly score the top of the challah loaves with a knife before reciting hamotzi. In one of our JLI classes long ago, I discussed it, if I recall correctly. Got to remember, that was a long time ago, I think in the Fascinating Facts course, which we did in 2010. So on the one hand, we'd like to cut the bread before reciting the blessing so that we don't make an interruption between the bracha and the eating, right? On the other hand, we cannot cut the bread before the blessing because we want to make a blessing on two whole challahs called lechem mishna, right? So we can't cut the bread before the blessing. So what do? So we score the challah before the blessing. We make like a line in it. And this can, practically or mentally at least, reduce the separation between the bracha and the eating. So I hope that reminds you of why you do that. You score the challah, then you make the bracha matzi lechem min aretz, and you are going to then slice the challah that you scored, dip the challah in salt. It's not Rosh Hashanah, so you don't have to dip it in honey, although we like sweetness all the time, right? We always want it to be sweet. Sweet is a nice thing to do, not sweet like a lemon. I remember another idea we once discussed, many reasons for dipping the bread in salt, but the primary reason is since our table is likened to the Mizbeach, it symbolizes the altar upon which the karbanos, the sacrifices, were brought. And just as a karban was sublimated on the altar, so is our food sublimated at our table if we eat it for a purpose of a mitzvah. We don't want to be gluttonous. Yes, it's true. Sometimes with all that delicious food in front of us, we can forget who we are. The Baal Shem Tov once asked the students to put their hands around each other and close their eyes. And he did a meditation with them where he showed them oxen eating chalent and gefilte fish and chicken soup with knedlach and all the good foods. And of course, the students got the lesson. While we eat at our Shabbos meal, we shouldn't become the animals that we're eating. We have to eat in a refined manner. And sometimes we forget that. And sometimes we become so gluttonous and we fresh like we've never seen food before in our life. Have you ever been at a shul kiddush at the bracha? My friend even invented one of these forks that can grab the sushi ahead because the kids finish it before the adults even get a piece of it. So we have to remember that we're dipping our challah into the salt, as all sacrifices were dipped into salt, to sublimate ourselves, to realize that we don't want to become animalistic. Yes, we have an animal soul, but we don't need to become our animalistic tendencies, and therefore just refine ourselves a little bit. And that's why we're dipping our bread into the salt. One of the reasons we're dipping our bread into the salt. And of course, only after, and don't forget to be quiet between the bracha of Netilat Yadayim and the bread, and only after you had a piece of bread and you give to others around you, now you could, of course, enjoy your meal. Someone's asking if you have to eat both challahs. No, you don't. If only one is consumed, you could put the second away for the next meal. Of course, if you have a lot of people at your meal, as we all usually do, then you will most likely want to make usage of that. We also, to make it easier, but everybody likes a piece of the challah. I've for the last many years, we put a challah roll at each place. But nevertheless, people like to, everybody wants a piece of the sliced challah. So we do that. Time for a story. Okay, here's a nice little maisela. Yeah, you should still dip it into the salt because that's symbolic. Cutting, you don't have to cut it. You can just pull a piece off. That's fine. Yeah. Any other questions on that? So there's a maisela on board a naval ship. The sailors were turning in their food trays while everything was eaten but the bread. So, you got to put the sailors are all getting their food trays. By the way, when I went to Israel last year, one of the experiences, we took our group to a kibbutz. My group was 17, 18, 19-year-old kids. So very young. And at this kibbutz, the kids finished eating and they thought they could walk away like they do in the hotels. The lady in charge of the cheder ochel, the dining room there, she called them back. in a kibbutz, everybody has responsibilities. She made every single one of these teens on our tour take their trays, bring it into the kitchen, clean it off. She said, you're cleaning it for the next group. So it was a cute, funny experience to see South African kids having to actually clean up after themselves. I was amazed and very grateful for that experience. Anyways, the kids didn't eat the breads. Of course, if you have other good food, why would you eat the bread? But this, of course, upset the mess officer who baked the bread. Felt really bad. Why did nobody eat it? So he asked if there was something wrong with the bread. And the sailor said, it was a little bit hard. He couldn't believe it. He said if Columbus had that bread, he and his crew would have eaten every single crumb. So, of course, one of the sailors piped up, yes, sir. But that's because this bread was far fresher back then. I should have changed it to who was on the Shapira van der, what was he called? Van Riebeeck, yeah. Next time I tell the story, remind me to say Van Riebeeck had the bread. All right. Don't let your meal be an ordinary meal, my friends. Okay, even every Shabbos meal has to be special, which is why the kids come and do their Parsha sheets and tell their stories and songs and Parsha questions and all that. And of course, you want good food. And good food, Yom Tov should be even more than a Shabbos. You should have all the gastronomic delights, and tasty food brings joy. And that helps us fulfill the requirement of V'samachta b'chagecha, that you should be extra joyful on a Yom Tov, right? Well, what are the traditional dishes that you have in a Yom Tov meal, especially in a Shavuos meal? I recall being at Shavuos dinners that are milchig. I don't know what my wife is going to do for tomorrow night. I'll let it be a surprise. But she's done milchig, dairy, many times at a Shavuos dinner. But traditional Yom Tov dinners have nicer cuts of meat even than Shabbos and more abundance of wine. And that's because our sages deemed that these foods, when consumed, obviously you don't want to be gluttonous, but in moderation, are especially conducive to facilitating joy. And you should have a delightful meal, share stories, sing songs, inspiration. My wife is preparing beautiful cards that we can have with our guests. And if you were at the Generation Sinai event yesterday with your children or grandchildren, Chief Rabbi's office gave out these magnificent cards that will be great to use at your Yom Tov meals with food for thought and questions and all types of things that are nice and conducive for a great conversation. So try to have lots of that. But the meal doesn't end tomorrow. Let me take you into what happens next after the meal. There's a tradition on Shavuos that we remain up all night. All night, don't go to sleep, have lots of coffee until the crack of dawn. And what do? Study Torah. Our sages described that the day we received the Torah is a betrothal ceremony between God and ourselves. And so in the hours leading up to our wedding, what happens? You stay awake with excitement and anticipation. And in fact, the bride's entourage beautify, they adorn her so that she'll look her very best for her special occasion and to greet her groom. And so this is an important special occasion. How are we going to adorn ourselves to receive the Torah, which is like this matrimonial event, the wedding between God and the Jewish people? Well, we spend the hours before the marriage when we hear the Ten Commandments, beautifying ourselves. How do we adorn and beautify ourselves? Is it through getting makeup? Through getting your mani-pedi? Hopefully you did that earlier as well. But of course, we're going to beautify ourselves spiritually by studying the Torah. And hence, we spend a whole evening studying, learning, and engrossing I don't like the word engrossing, immersing ourselves in the study of Torah. That's how we prepare to receive the Torah once again. So stay up all night, studying Torah, yeah?
In current times, on the Erev Shavuot,
Yeah.
we have big feast meal, we celebrate. My question is, before Matan Torah in the desert, the original Matan Torah, there were very strict conditions placed on the celebration.
Yeah.
But did they also have a feast before?
That's a good question. They had to abstain from intimacy. They had to prepare themselves spiritually. Well, one of the things we know they did the night before, unlike us, they actually, the Medrash says, that the night before God gave the Torah to the Jewish people, they went to sleep. Maybe they thought that's a good way to prepare. You want to be well rested. So when God arrived to give them the Torah, the Medrash says they were still sleeping. They were chrapping. They were having a bagel. So in order to rectify this, and in fact, there's a verse in the prophet Isaiah. God says, why did I arrive? Karasi ve'inana. I arrived, there was no man. I called, there was no response. So therefore, this is a rectification. In fact, that's the meaning of the word tikkun leil Shavuos. What does tikkun mean? Tikkun means to fix. We're fixing, we're rectifying this omission that they slept the night before receiving the Torah. Now, while it might mean that they felt it's a good way, that they should be well rested, they wanted to separate themselves from materialism, and the best way to do that was by going to sleep. So, in fact, they felt that that was a way to prepare. But nevertheless, we stay awake to prepare by studying and beautifying ourselves with the Torah, and that's what we do. But what do? Do we just stay up all night partying, talking? Many shuls are going to have nice delicacies, good food. We'll have biltong at our shul. I'm buying lots of fresh biltong, soft and yummy, with chili bites, so people could, and other goodies. We'll have lots of pots of coffee to keep people awake. But for us, the idea, the custom of studying is to stay up late, not just to stay awake late, but rather to study. So Tikkun Leil Shavuos is a book that has in it a sampling of every aspect of Torah, from beginning to end. And there's all kinds of, from Tanakh, first three and last three verses of every parsha, and then there is more. So it goes through all of Tanakh, and it goes through the Mishnah, and it goes through the Talmud, and it goes through the Zohar. It goes through everything, so that while you're staying awake a whole night, we are able to do tikkun. Tikkun again means fixing. We're fixing what we did, and tikkun also means an adornment. So we are adorning ourselves with beautifying ourselves for the event of receiving the Torah. So go through, you're not going to read every verse of the whole Torah, because that will take a long time. You could do it with pleasure, but we get a sampling. So first three and last three passages of, is it every chapter or every parsha? I'm forgetting. I don't remember if it's every chapter or every parsha. What else do we do? First and last passage of each Mishnah and each tractate in the Talmud. We have a list of all 613 mitzvahs. We have tracts from the Zohar, from the mystical side. We have the book of Sefer Yetzirah, the book of formation. What else do we have in here? The book of Ruth. Yes, the whole book of Ruth is in there. Why the whole book of Ruth and not portions of it? We'll get to that in a moment, because the book of Ruth is very relevant to Shavuos, and I'm going to talk more about the book of Ruth in just now. So, good question. But basically, and why the whole book of Ruth? You have a good point there when I think about it, because besides for the sampling, we have complete chapters of any specific episodes that are unique or have special significance to Shavuos. So the narrative of creation, because without creation, we wouldn't be here. Right? We have the raison d'etre, the purpose of existence is for humanity. So that's the whole narrative of creation is included, and it's not just the summary. We have the whole Exodus from Egypt, because after all, it's Shavuos that leads to it's Pesach that leads to Shavuos, right? Pesach, we celebrate our exodus from Egypt, our journey into the desert as freedom from slavery, our emancipation from bondage, right? But the book of Bamidbar, which is our journey through the desert into the promised land. So we're going to describe parts of that. So we have the splitting of the Sea of Reeds, the giving of the Torah. Of course, that's the event that we're celebrating on Shavuos. So by studying this book, it allows us to scan the entire corpus of Torah, the written Torah, the oral Torah, the commandments, the Kabbalah, the concealed mystical dimension of Torah. And basically this book gives us a tasting of all these. And Rochelle is asking, it has the book of Ruth. I had some slides for Ruth. I don't know where they went, so I don't want to mess with this. But basically, we have the whole book of Ruth. And it's a good point you're mentioning because it is customary. Many shuls do it on day, and the Chabad custom is by night. But basically, the morning of Shavuos, before reading the Ten Commandments, we read the book of Ruth, the whole book of Ruth. Why is that? Well, the book of Ruth tells the story of, guess who? Babe Ruth. No, not Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth is a famous American baseball player. But the book of Ruth, you know what Boaz was before he married Ruth? Ruthless. Tell you that every year. Ruth is the ancestress of King David. She was a Moabite princess, and she sacrificed a life of luxury to live as a poor and simple convert to Judaism. Did I tell you the story last week? I don't remember if I've done it this year. I don't remember what I did, what I had for breakfast this morning. I didn't have. I don't eat breakfast in the mornings. So you think I remember what I told you yesterday or today? The story of Ruth in a nutshell, and why we talk about it is worthwhile repeating. But the story of Ruth in a nutshell, the book of Ruth starts off talking about was the days of the judges of Israel. Now, if you've read the books of the judges, it was a difficult, challenging time in our history. And that's a reminder to me that Judaism is not one of those fantasy religions that only likes to tell the rosy, nice stories of our history. Because if it did, I think there's a lot here that could be omitted. Because there's lots of embarrassing episodes in the book of, both in the book of Ruth and throughout the books of Judges. The period, the era of our shoftim, of our judges, is a difficult time in our history. But actually, our sages tell us why it tells us the era of the judges. It says people were judgmental of each other. And it was a difficult period in our history. But we see that history doesn't judge some of these judges very judgmentally well. Okay. What happened was that there was one of the great judges at the time, a leader in the Jewish people, a wealthy man by the name of Elimelech. He was affluent. He was very, what's the word I'm looking for here, prominent. And Elimelech, at the time, there was a famine in Israel. There was a drought. Crops weren't growing. The agriculture was wasn't doing well. And people didn't have what to eat. So what do you think all the destitute, impoverished people did? They went to the wealthier people. Elimelech didn't want to share all his wealth. So what did he do? He skipped town. As we all know, a captain, a leader, is not meant to be the one who jumps off ship. The captain's the last one to lead the ship. And if you remember the plane that landed in the Hudson River a couple of years ago, I was already living here. But Captain Sully they called him, right? There's a movie about it. And the plane landed in the Hudson River. Amazing, miraculous story. He's the last one to leave the plane. And all 155 of his passengers were rescued. A couple of weeks back, we reminded ourselves the story of Titanic, right? And then there was the Costa Concordia, where it was the opposite. On the Titanic, the captain drowned with his passengers. On the Costa Concordia, the captain was showing off and caused his boat to crash and 30-something of his passengers to die. And he was the first one off ship. Well, in the book of Ruth, Elimelech, who is meant to be an important, prominent leader amongst his people, sadly leaves town. He escapes. He has enough of these destitute, impoverished people coming and asking him for charity. And so he leaves with his wife, Naomi, and his two sons, Machlan and Kilian. Where do they go? They go to a neighboring country called Moab. Where's Moab? I'm not exactly sure. Somewhere near Israel. Maybe it was Syria. Maybe it was Turkey. I don't know. One of the other countries. It's not a country that today is known as Moab. Do you know where it is? Which country it is? Which one? Part of Jordan. Okay. I'm thinking to go to Jordan in a few weeks' time when I'm in Israel. Should I do that? Anyone ever been there? Can I take my kids? I'm not sure. I'm thinking about it. I want to go to Moab. I want to see where Elimelech's story happened, or what are the other sites of Moab. Aaron is buried in Moab. Aaron HaKohen. He's my great-great-grandfather. On my mother's side, we come from Kohanim. My mother's family was Cats. Pardon?
Go on to Mount Scopus and look east.
And look there, okay. Anyways, somewhere in Jordan was a land, a province known as Moab. By the way, the Moabites were unkind to the Jewish people in the desert. When Moshe Rabbeinu asked them if we could just go through their land on our way to Israel, they refused. They wouldn't even allow us provisions, bread, or drink, nothing. So Moabites are not actually meant to come into the Jewish nation. We'll get back to that. The story goes that Elimelech did not have nachas from running away because he escaped his position, his leadership, his role. He ran away and it didn't benefit him. He lost his wealth. And, well, first he didn't lose his wealth. What Jews live in Moab? No Jews were living there. And in Judaism, we know you're meant to marry in the Jewish faith. His children didn't have Jews to marry. They married out of the faith. They married Moabite princesses. Machla married Ruth. Kilia married Orpah, or maybe the other way around. I have to read the book again. I haven't read it in a whole year. So I have to double check who married who. But either way, they married out of the faith, but they married rich. They were wealthy. So they married Moabite princesses. But unfortunately, the wealth didn't stay with them. Machlan and Kilian died. Elimelech died a broken man, losing his children. And now Naomi, widowed, felt she had nothing to live in the land of Moab for, and she chose to go back home to the land of Israel. She turned to her daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth, and she said, please, you don't need to go with an old widow, poor, from riches to rags. Don't come with me. Stay here behind. At first, very politely, they both said, no, we want to come with you. But ultimately, we know what happens. Orpah kisses her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth cleaves to and stays close to her mother-in-law, to Naomi. And completely destitute, impoverished, the two of them move back to Israel. You would think Naomi, being previously a prominent person, would be welcome. No, people didn't like her. You abandoned us. You jumped ship when we needed you most. You didn't want to share your wealth with others. Goodbye. And now Naomi and Ruth had to go into the fields and collect the harvest. Now, in Judaism, we know there's very interesting rules of charity. What are the rules? That if you own a agricultural field, you can't keep all the goods for yourself. Embedded into the very fabric of Judaism is the charity you must give. You probably know all this. I'm repeating stuff that I tell you year after year, but it's worthwhile. My memory is not so good. Maybe yours is better. So it's worthwhile to repeat it and to know it. So we know that there's 3 types of charities that you have to do if you own a field. Actually, there's a lot more than 3. But 3 with the agriculture itself, and then others have to do with your tithes. How much you give. There's Meiser, there's a certain tithe you give to the poor. There's a tithe you give to the Levite. There's a tithe you give to the Kohen. There's Bikurim, the first fruits you enjoy, that you yourself enjoy in Jerusalem. But within the field itself, there is a tithe called Leket. There's another one called Shikha. The third one's called Peah. What are they? Let's go backwards. Peah is the corner of your field. Peah is also your payas, right? The corner of your hair that your payas, exactly. Different people have different levels of how much of their payas they keep, but that's a biblical commandment. And it's also reminiscent, reminds us of the corner of your field that you don't cut. You leave that to begin with, that the poor can enjoy. The poor can come into your field with your permission, and in the sabbatical year without your permission, and they can enjoy that corner. It's theirs, it's not yours. Leket is you're loading your trucks, and some of the crops fall. Don't touch it. If it fell, that's leket. That's for the poor to collect. And shikha is the boxes you left behind. You forgot about them. By mistake, you didn't load them in the truck. Can you call the truck back now to take them? No. Shikha's forgotten. That's destined to go to the poor. And that's what Naomi and Ruth were subsisting. They were living off exactly that food from the harvest. And that was food. So she sent it on Ruth. And when Ruth was collecting harvest, she was known Boaz. Boaz was actually a relative of her husband, of Machlan. And so he halachically has an obligation to marry the next in kin is meant to marry the widow. This is a law called the levirate marriage. called either, you could do Yibum or Chalitza. Nobody yet did Chalitza, which would be the separation, the termination of that relationship. Yibum is the next in kin has to marry the widow. Because Ruth was married to Machlon, and Machlon's cousin was Boaz, Boaz was meant to marry her. Not Naomi. Well, I guess he can marry. No, not Naomi. I'll tell you why not Naomi. Naomi had children. The levirate marriage is only for a woman whose husband died and did not bear any children through her. We had it here with our members of this program. We had a member here, Sam Anashevitz. Sam's brother passed away, leaving his wife a widow, and they had no children. And Sam had to do chalitza, had to go to the Beis Din office here in Johannesburg and perform chalitza with his sister-in-law. Because we don't do polygamy anymore since the invention of the credit card. So, sorry, terrible misogynistic jokes that go on in this place. So, so it is during that time that Boaz noticed his wife to be Ruth, and our sages tell us Ruth was actually very modest, and it describes in great detail how he noticed her. And so, because this all happened on Shavuos, I think there's a few lessons we could take. Firstly, that this is the harvest season, right? Shavuos is the harvest season. Shavuos, every one of our holidays is related to an agricultural event. And Shavuos is the time when we gather in the harvest. So we're talking this story, and it's appropriate to read this book on Shavuos, which is also called the festival of our harvest. So I think, and also the story itself, that Shavuos is the birthday and passing of King David. Oh, we didn't go into that. So Boaz marries Ruth. He was no longer ruthless. And now he and Ruth had a child by the name of Oved. Oved and his wife had a child by the name of Jesse, Yishai. And guess who was Yishai's child? You guessed it, King David. King David was born and passed away on Shavuos. It's his birthday. I was also born on Shavuos. I didn't yet pass away on Shavuos. So, because when I was in the restaurant, they asked me if I wanted, the cold drink, do you want a regular or a diet? I said, no, I don't want a diet. But if I die in Shavuos, I was righteous. Most likely I won't die in Shavuos because only righteous people die on the day they're born. So this is part of the reasons we read the book of Ruth on Shavuos. Ruth also, I think there's another important lesson we could take, because Ruth was the quintessential convert to Judaism. She embraced Judaism with all her heart. She made tremendous sacrifice to do so. And her story teaches us that those who sacrifice to join the Jewish people, as many great people did, very famously Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva converted, his parents converted to Judaism, and maybe he too was a convert with them. And it took a tremendous sacrifice for him to become the great sage and scholar and once he became that great sage, he didn't stop. He was Kamayan of his Gabra, like this overflowing fortress and he became one of the greatest scholars and sages in Israel. And so we realize that in Shavuos, we all convert. We're all like converts to Judaism. We're all reaffirming our vows to Judaism, like our ancestors became Jews on Shavuos, just like Ruth became a Jew and her descendant, King David, was born and passed away on this day. So all these reasons combined contributes to our Jewish way of life. So it's appropriate that we read the book of Ruth and Shavuos when the Jewish people converted and became Jews, and all the other elements of that we discussed about the book of Ruth. Okay, any other questions about Tikkun Leil Shavuos? We don't have that much time left, so let's go through some other important parts of our morning service. Some people have a custom of davening very early on Shavuos morning. Why do they do that? Because you stayed up all night and you want to make sure you daven. So many of the shuls are going to have a very early morning minyan. At the wedding I was at last night, the guy sitting next to me said he's going to be at the base, and he has there's a whole lineup of shiurim, and he was telling me he's going to be giving a shiur, and he was describing to me what his shiur is going to be there. And he said they're going to daven at 5 something and 6 o'clock in the morning, right after Shachris. Right after Tikkun Leil, they're going to daven, have a little kiddush, and then go to sleep. Many people have that custom. I was in Israel one Shavuos. We stayed up a whole night. I walked to the Kotel. It was an unbelievable experience. I walked back. My wife tells me she was one of the young ladies. Her seminary was giving out all the treats to the people walking home after the morning service. She said, I gave you a treat. Do you remember? That was 1999. I don't remember, but she was there. She's also not sure if she gave it to me, but she said she was one of the young ladies giving her out those treats. I came back to my uncle's house. We had a quick meal and everybody went to sleep. Woke up at midday for a nice big meal. Whatever your custom is, in my shul, we do the opposite. The Chabad custom is to stay up all night and to go to bed and wake up refreshed after a quick nap. What do you call those quick naps? There's a name for it. Quick ziz, cat nap. I see that in Asia, they have this thing where they created these nap labs. Have you seen it? You go in, they say 20 minutes is like the sweet spot. And business people go for a 20-minute nap during their lunch break. Anyways, you don't have to have a 20-minute nap. If you go to bed at 6 a.m., you could get up. We daven at 10 a.m. on Shavuos. You could have a good 3.5-hour nap and then come back to shul refreshed. And so come to shul, and then you'll daven. On the screen, we have the order of some of the extra things we're going to do in davening. So, of course, you're going to add into the Amida, the Yalav Yava. You are going to have a different tune for the davening. Unlike a regular Shabbos, when you do Shochenat Maram V'Kadosh Shema. What do we do on Yom Tov? What's the tune? Shochenat Maram V'Kadosh Shema V'Chasuf. Don't you want a little rehearsal of practice now? Come on. Ranenu tzadikim basha. Okay, no voice left. Saving it for Yom Tov. Okay, on Yom Tov, you're going to add in Hallel. What else? Okay, let me take you to the next thing. There's something called Akdamos. Okay. Oh, somebody's asking here a question. If you're davening early, well, do you have to wash your hands? I think you do. There are different opinions about whether you have to wash your hands. I'm doing a separate shir at my shul about davening. And I think the custom is that you wash your hands even if you didn't sleep. You're going to wash until at Yadayim. And you're going to say the morning blessings. It's a good question, but I think you do say them after sunrise. I don't know, you're catching me off guard, so I'll have to answer that question later. Yeah. Okay.
There is a belief that when the sun sets, the evil spirits come out and they are roaming the world looking for appropriate bodies to make. So you wash your hands to get rid of anything.
Yeah. In general, I would say something else. The halacha is that before you walk into a shul, before you pray, you're meant to wash your hands. So regardless, you wash your hands and you'll say the morning blessings. Okay, let's go based on the screen. On the screen, we show here special prayers include Hallel. Let's talk about Hallel. We said Hallel this past Sunday because this past Sunday was Rosh Chodesh. We say Hallel on very special occasions. What's the idea behind Hallel? Hallel means praise. Now, every day is a gift, right? Remember the expression my mother told me? I don't know who the anonymous author of it was, but yesterday's history, tomorrow's a mystery, today's a gift of God, which is why it's called the present. Every day is a gift. Every day is a gift of Hashem. Every breath is a miracle. And we sing God's praises for these miracles every day. But at times of joy and salvation, such as a Yom Tov, when we experience an extra measure of God's love and protection, well, we gather as a community to sing God's praises. We acknowledge that every detail in our lives is orchestrated by our loving Father in heaven for purposes that are beyond, that are just absolutely good, that Hashem cares for us. So what we're going to do is we're going to sing this Hallel, which is a joyous and uplifting event. And in fact, there's a halacha that if you come to shul late and the minyan is holding a Hallel, you will join the minyan for Hallel. Sing it together with the minyan and then catch up. Because Hallel stimulates feelings of love and gratitude that are not only personal experiences, but collective as a community. And so God sees our joy and God responds and kind of gives us even more joy. God bestows blessings on us with joyful abundance. So just as we thank our fellow human beings and praise people who do kindness to us, well, we have to do the same. And God delights in the praises of his children, just as we delight in praise. When people praise us, we feel good, don't we, right? So that it's important that we know it's not that God needs our praises, right? We need to praise God, because when we praise God, it deepens our bond It fans the flames of our love, and it brings to the surface our feelings of gratitude to God for all the bountiful blessings and gifts that God gives us. So it's very important. Hallel is a very important one of the prayers. I know some people who like to ask, what are the highlight prayers? I would certainly say this is a highlight prayer. I'm not telling you to omit or skip previous parts of the davening, but certainly Hallel is a highlight prayer of every Yom Tov. These are praises that are collected by David HaMelech, by King David. They were incorporated into Tehillim, but they were written at different parts, different times in our history. And some of them are attributed to Moshe Rabbeinu, like B'tzeit Yisrael Mitzrayim, describing when the Jewish people left Egypt and the splitting of the sea. There's parts that are written by Joshua when the Jews came to the land of Israel. Moshiv LaHashem Kol Tagmol Lahi. So you'll sing the different parts and hopefully be in shul and celebrate that. So it's there's lots of beautiful tunes, and that's certainly a highlight prayer of a Yom Tov. Any other thoughts on that? Yeah. Somebody just sent me a vart, but it's short, so I'll share it with you. It says it was a terrible storm. And the captain asks if anyone on the ship knows how to pray. So the rabbi steps up and says, yes, I know how to pray. Say, good. You pray while the rest of us put on life jackets. We're short one. Yeah. Okay, let's talk here about the next thing. I'm going to go a little bit over time because it's late. I know it's late, but I want to cover a few more points. Akdamas. You'll notice in the Chabad Siddur there's Akdamas, but not everybody says it. The Rebbe was known to say Akdamas. In the non-Chabad Siddurim, it is prominently, it's something that's said after Hallel, before the reading of the Torah. I guess it's before the recital of the book of Ruth as well. So you get some extra stuff, unless Ruth is said and they ask for a second. I don't know. I'm not even sure. But many communities chant this elaborate poetic ode called Akdamas. If you look at it in your Siddur, you'll see the words Akdamas Mili, da 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 da. It's a beautiful tune, and it is read responsively with the leader. The leader reads 2 stanzas, and the congregation responds with the following 2 stanzas. You read it back and forth. It's an Aramaic prayer, and it praises God's greatness that transcends all description. And it goes on to describe all the myriads of angels that God created and the way in which they praise Hashem. It proclaims our allegiance to God, to nobody else, as the 10 Commandments describes. Commandment number 1, I believe, there's one God, no others, right? Lo yelech, not to have any other gods. And it concludes with the description of the miraculous events that will actually take place in the future era, please God, soon with the coming of Mashiach. So it is a very powerful prayer. It is a poem, and it's written in the alphabetical order. So I think there are, anyways, I'm not going to go into the details of what I do or don't know, but that's part of the Yom Tov liturgy. So I encourage you to look at it, to read it, to recite it. And then we go on to the Torah reading. Torah reading is very important because the most important is that we're going to recite the 10 Commandments, right? So it's the day we received the Torah at Mount Sinai, 3,338 years ago. So we are going to receive the Torah anew on this day, and it's important that we listen to the 10 Commandments, and we should bring everybody to shul, men, women, and children, seniors, infants. Everybody should be there to be present. And when the 10 Commandments are going to be read, everybody should stand in reverence and awe, just as was done when God gave the Torah at Mount Sinai. There's a different tune that's used for the 10 Commandments than for the rest of the Torah reading. So you'll notice, Anochi Hashem Elokecha. It's a different tune than the regular Torah reading. And we should listen to it. We should focus. We should concentrate. We should listen with passion and zeal. And as the Torah is read, we should visualize ourselves standing at Mount Sinai and seeing the thunder and hearing the lightning and listening to God's voice intone the commandments. And of course, after you hear the commandments, what do? We're going to celebrate. I mean, there'll be Musaf first, but after Musaf, we're going to have a special bracha, a celebration, in which we eat special kinds of foods. What special foods do we eat at the bracha? Oh, somebody's asking me. Sorry, Ilana's asking here about the children being guarantors. Okay, let's talk about that first. So, yes, I think I mentioned it yesterday that when God asked for who's going to be the guarantors to ensure the continuity of Torah, well, the first offered the parents and the grandparents and the elders and the leaders and the rabbis and the rebbitzins, but only when they offered the children, God accepted that as a guarantee that the Torah will be kept in perpetuity into future generations. So that's why it's important, yes, that you bring children, that everybody should be present, but especially the children. And yes, part of what we do on Yom Tov is to have special treats for the kids. Where's my ice cream picture? We want to make sure the kids have treats. So yes, there's going to be ice cream parties and all the other goodies that are there for the children to enjoy. But not only the children, I think we're all kids at heart, right? So let's, and then don't forget also, there is going to be a Birchas Kohanim. So when you look at the prayers, there is Birchas Kohanim in Musaf. So in the Musaf, we also say that we are unable to bow before you, right? So we don't mean just that we can't bow to God today, but God is everywhere, obviously, right? But that we can't. We're not at the temple, right? Where the divine presence was actually palpable and we felt completely nullified before God. So since the temple was destroyed, as we say in our prayers, okay, I'm not going to give you the whole prayer service now, but as you notice in the Musaf, there's lots of joy, but there's also certain moments of sadness that are within the prayer, that are embedded in it, such as this prayer that describes that we no longer have the temple, and it's something we remember. I'll tell you a story before we go on to the dairy foods. There was a prominent student of the Mezritcha Maggid who stopped in Karlin to visit his friend Reb Arle of Karlin, great holy Hasidic master. And he knocked on the door, but Reb Aaron refused to answer. And he knocked more. So he called out, he said, Reb Arle, why don't you answer? It's me. It's your friend. So Reb Arle replied, who is it that could say it is me? Only God could say, Anochi, it's me. But for God, there's only nothingness. So the friend realized the error that he said. If so, he said, I failed to learn anything I did back in Mezrich at our Rebbe, Rabbi Dov Ber. And rather than continue home, he went back to Mezrich to learn more. I think it's important that when we come to this holiday and we're going to read the Ten Commandments and we read Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I'm the Lord your God, to realize God is the ultimate I. But what level of I, the very essence of Hashem that God connected with us, and the word Anochi, which means I, that is a reference to that Hashem says, is an acronym of Ana Ksavis Yahavis, Ana Nafshi Ksavis Yahavis, which means God embedded his very essence in the Torah. Just like any book you read, you're connecting with its author. Well, when you study the Torah and you renew your commitment to the study of Torah, then we are able to connect with its author in a much deeper way. That's ultimately what we're doing on Shavuos. So what happens when we connect with Hashem in a deeper way? That's something to celebrate. So how do we celebrate? Well, it's customary to eat dairy dishes on Shavuos. Why dairy dishes? Every Yom Tov has its own kind of menu. On Pesach, you're going to have matzahs. And on Chanukah, you're going to have latkes and donuts. And on Purim, you're going to have your hamantash and Rosh Hashanah apples dipped in honey. And every holiday has its food. Well, Shavuos is cheesecake, yes, and blintzes, right? What else do you like to have? What are your favorite milchig dishes? Ice cream and yogurts and cream cheese and we used to get some very special cheeses. My father used to go out and get all these really nice cheeses. We don't have much variety of that here, but my father used to get a nice cheese spread every year for Shavuos in our parents' home. Really nice variety of cheeses. Sour cream and cream cheese and ricotta cheese and a whole bunch of hard cheeses. It was a feast. It's very special. So, of course, I remember it very well. What's the reason for all this cheesy stuff? Why all this dairy on Shavuos? I want to finish up. So I'm gonna. Okay, go ahead, quick. Wait, you asking a question or you're? Oh no, let me do it. I'm going to rush. I want to rush through it. When the Torah was given to us on Shavuos, the Jews became obligated to observe the kosher dietary laws. That's what you were heading on to, hey? And the meat that they'd prepared in advance wasn't necessarily slaughtered in the proper ritual way. Now, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But now, even if it was, they weren't commanded to do so yet. So now they were commanded to do so. And therefore, their utensils, all their dishes required koshering in order for it to be usable in a kosher manner. Since it was Shabbos and they weren't able to slaughter new animals or to kosher the dishes properly, so my friends, they ate dairy instead. That's why they ate dairy on Shavuos. What else do we say? Dairy and meat meals remind us of the two. And by the way, we eat not only dairy, we also have a meat meal. What's the reason for that? Because you have to have two distinct meals. One meal being dairy, the other being meat. And that reminds us of the special offering of 2 loaves of bread that was brought in the temple on Shavuos. And by doing so, we are able to distinguish and differentiate between those 2 breads, having one symbolized by the milk meal and one afterwards by the meat meal. It also reminds us of the Torah, which is compared to milk and honey. In fact, somebody brought a whiskey to Shul on Shabbos called Milk and Honey. It's an Israeli one. It's very nice. Okay. In the Talmud, it's what's that? I got on a word. Interesting. The Talmud mentions that when you want to excite children to study, you have to give them treats. And the Talmud mentions back in the day, in ancient times, little children were inaugurated into formal Torah learning on Shavuos. So to celebrate the festive occasion, they would serve cakes that were baked with honey and milk. And that's another reason why, another idea behind the milk and honey, the sweetness of Shavuos. So make sure to have your ice cream and all the other good things. And we also have to drink wine. You make kiddush before the meal, and wine facilitates happiness and rejoicing. If you have too much cheese and wine together, you know what that does? Gives you a headache. So you don't want that. Makes you tired. You'll probably be tired anyways from staying up all night. Okay, so you don't want the joy to get out of hand. And so the celebration should be done and conducted in a refined manner that certainly would be one in which the best way to celebrate this holiday is to talk about and to learn and to study the Torah. So that's the ideal. Yom Tov is a holy day when we should spend at least part of the day immersed in Torah study. And the ideal thing to do is to spend more time studying Torah. Okay, obviously, if you're exhausted from the night before and you have a whole day in Yom Tov ahead, then you should get ready for the next day. So, as the first day of Shavuos draws to a close, we in diaspora actually are going to go to Shul again. Even in Israel, they're going to go to Shul again. Why is that? Because it's going to be Shabbos. In Israel, it's going to actually, it's an ordinary day again. Or it's Isra Chag, it's still a special day. But Israel or diaspora, so those of you joining us here from Israel, it's going to be a special day for you too. And of course, we discussed this previously. It goes all the way back to the times when the months were determined by the Sanhedrin. So they didn't know what day it began, and therefore they observed 2 days. But now that regardless, we're going to observe 2 days. The only thing I want to say about the second day, besides for it being my birthday, is that we say Yizkor. Okay, so don't forget that on the second day you go back to Shul for Yizkor to remember our beloved departed. Towards the end of Yom Tov, there are other things we do. Just as Yom Tov is, we just as we start Yom Tov with joy, we end it. The Hasidic custom is that we have a Seder Nagunim, a time to get together, to sing songs, special soul-stirring melodies. And of course, there's another name for this holiday that I didn't want to forget. So thanks for this slide. It is also called Chag HaBikurim. We spoke about Chag HaAsif. It's the holiday of the, we spoke before about being the harvest, and that connects to Bikurim. Bikurim is first fruits. And back in the temple times, farmers would go into their orchards this time of the year, and they would tie a reed around the first fruits to ripen. And when they would go to the temple on their pilgrimage to Jerusalem, they would bring along a basket of these fruits. And of course, thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands, Josephus describes millions of people would come and would converge in Jerusalem with their baskets from all directions. They would sing, they would dance, they would celebrate with musical accompaniment. In temple times, he played music even on the Yom Tov. And they would arrive en masse and enter the temple, and they would say a special prayer called the, what was it called again? It's the Bikurim confession, right? And they would declare that they brought all their special, they did all their tithe and everything else, and now they're coming and they're delivering this basket before Hashem, and the fruits were then donated to the Kohanim, and they would express their gratitude to God for taking them out of Egypt and for bringing them to the land of Israel, to the land flowing with milk and honey, and all that. Now, while it's true that today we no longer bring Bikurim to Jerusalem, but we focus on our own gratitude to God for his bounty that God provides us with all of our needs. One more name for Shavuos that I also want to mention is Atzeres. What does Atzeres mean? Atzeres means like a pause. And that is a name that the Torah uses for this holiday. Now, of course, the Pesach and Shavuos and Sukkot are all called Shalosh Regalim, the three pilgrimage festivals. Regel literally means your foot. You got to move with your foot. You got to dance with your foot. You got to climb with your foot. You got to journey with your foot to go to Jerusalem. But the days of Pesach and Sukkot, you have you have the intermediate days in between. It starts at the beginning with a holy day and ends. Shavuos is only one day, right? You don't have a Chol HaMoed. So this holiday is also called Atzeres, and something interesting that the Kedushas Levi, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, gives an interesting reason. He says it is a Yom Tov with no particular instructions. Take, for example, Sukkot. You have an instruction to take the 4 species, right? To sit in your sukkah. On Pesach, you have a mitzvah to eat matzah. But on Shavuos, there's no positive command. There's no particular commandment. There's no commandment that you have to hear the 10 commandments. This is something we do. Not a commandment in the Torah to do it. There's no command in the Torah what you have to do. So it's Atzeres. Atzeres means a pause. It's a day to pause and reflect that God gave us the Torah. How do we do so? Of course, by listening to the 10 commandments. And considering that there's no Chol HaMoed like Pesach and Sukkot, so Shavuos is called Atzeres because there's no time when you're able to pause, meaning on Pesach and Sukkot, you have the intermediate days. Here it's completely a pause, it's Atzeres. And another thing I saw was that you just counted 49 days. Did everybody count last night was? 48. One day left of your counting. So Hashem says you counted 49 days. Well, now you're going to have a pause, a termination, and therefore it's called Atzeret. So just to conclude, I want to just say that just as we mentioned Yom Tov by reciting Kiddush when it begins, so we do Havdalah at the conclusion. It's a beautiful ceremony to separate the holy day from the ordinary week. And we do the same thing as we do when Shabbos, when Yom Tov comes in, we are going to recite a blessing on a cup of wine. You're going to do like any Matzah Shabbos, as this year it's a Saturday night, have your aromatic spices called your besamim. You can have cloves or other good, nice smelling things. You're going to have your the braided candle, and you are going to perform the Havdalah ceremony as you do every Shabbos, and then of course recite the blessings for the coming week called V'yitin Lecha, and please God, those blessings will come to all of us with much abundance, that we could all receive the Torah in a way of great joy and internalizing its message in a meaningful way. So I wish everybody here a beautiful, meaningful Shavuos. I hope that we are able to take all the messages that we learned and discussed today, and hopefully we'll all be meritorious to be granted abundant blessings and be grateful to God as we are meant to be on Shavuos. And please God, we'll have only simcha, joy, and good days ahead. Wishing you all a Chag Sameach. There's no classes tomorrow. Classes will resume next week. Please God, enjoy lunch, enjoy knitting, and see you all on Monday. Bezrat Hashem. Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for the good wishes. If anyone wants